Hi guys, I am Vitold and this is likely the most important review of the year. And there are not many disappointments here with the newest and hottest Triumph Tiger 1200. I've had mine in the GT Pro version, so with the normal fuel tank, no additional off-road features like larger front rim that here in this one is 19 inches, while in the more off-road oriented version, so the rally one, there is a 21-inch rim, but also with some more complete equipment than the standard GT, and so at the same time the entry level. Man, I've been waiting for a long time for this day, and this is mostly to answer two main questions. First, what it's like to ride, and the second, is it now the best bike in class? This Triumph, it's kind of a triumph, like literally a triumph, but it's a brand new bike with the most recent technology and engineering learnings on Triumph's side as well. So all the hype is very much justified here, and I already know the answer to both questions. As for the first part, let me start from things that I was noticing and experiencing as the first ones as well. So approaching the bike, it doesn't make a huge impression or sort of a statement. It's not that huge, even though it's a large bike generally, but its proportions and lots of thin design elements make it look light and sleek rather than heavy and muscular. Standing next to a Tiger 900, not many people will know which one is which, and I'm not sure that's actually that good for the bigger Tiger. Both may appear as having a cool shape, but I'm actually not exactly sure if I would really call them pretty. The front lamp reminds me of something, but I cannot recall what exactly, and I hope that you guys can help with that perhaps. Those bikes do look modern, I think, and somehow people on the streets were looking at mine quite often, even despite its fairly regular and boring blue color. Now, once you sit on this big boy, it doesn't overwhelm you like an Africa Twin, for example. It seems very similar to Ducati Multistrada V4, to BMW R1250 GS2, but with a more narrow handlebar, I believe. So it makes you interested, in fact, and not scared in the beginning, and that's good. There's a keyless ignition system, also with a keyless fuel cap. Good job here, Triumph. Good job. And it works fine as well, but after switching the ignition on, you've got to wait for the display to load and become alive. This here may be unfortunately necessary in some circumstances, may be a little bit annoying. There's a similar problem in an Africa Twin, which takes ridiculously long, but there you might just not give a crap and start the bike and ride off. Here with the Tiger 1200, not always, because you can only start the engine after pulling the clutch. But if you've got the bike only on the center stand, pull the clutch and start the bike not seeing if it's for sure in neutral, you may hurt yourself and the bike if it turns out that in fact it wasn't in neutral for whatever reason. Now, having said that, the bike will not start with the gear engaged and the side stand open. So it solves the problem in this situation mostly, but I still think it's strange to have to pull the clutch to start it. With the bike on the center stand, having it in the first gear and starting it with the clutch pulled, it will start. The rear wheel immediately starts spinning. I think, prefer to not have to pull the clutch and automatically not be able to start the bike at all if it's in gear. That's just a hint from me. After setting off, it feels pretty normal. So there's nothing that would drag your attention too much. It follows your command. It doesn't fight. It doesn't want to fall, but it also doesn't exactly tell you to push it or to play with it. This actually changes at one particular moment. So the first impression is that it feels not too heavy, considering also its real weight of 245 kilograms with fuel, with 90% of fuel claimed by Triumph in the GT Pro version with some additional equipment like this one. The base one, so the GT without the Pro, is 5 kilograms lighter. It's not feeling as happy and nimble at low speeds as BMW R1250 GS, but it's in line with Ducati Multistrada V4, so it's fine. But then getting to a properly open road, you also open the throttle and freaking magic happens. And man, this engine is fantastic. And I haven't found even one flaw of it, except for the fact that it did die on me in traffic at some point for no particular reason. I started it back and it continued. I'm not sure what caused it, so I guess it may be a similar story to what happened to Yamaha Tracer 9 that I've ridden, and all that ended up in a recall. Here I approached an intersection, pulled the clutch in, and my body just died. Anyway, when it works, the engine is full of potential, and let me explain that properly, because there's a reason why I'm starting the review with the engine. There's 150 horsepower, and those are proper horses, maybe some of them a little bit on steroids, but overall healthy and ready, especially if you've got the bike in sport mode. The power is there, but the torque is there too. 130 Newton meters is a lot, and the leader in its class, BMW R1250 GS, has 143 Newton meters, but it's a two-cylinder boxer, while here we've got a three-cylinder inline engine with 1160 cubic centimeters of displacement. You would think that it's more like BMW's S1000XR or Ducati's Multistrada V4, which both have four cylinders. But no, it's closer to a proper V2 or a boxer, so it pulls hard from the bottom, and this makes it, I'm going to say it guys, more fun than both of those that I mentioned, even though it's got slightly less power, but it's a better balance of power and torque than anything else, with only maybe Harley Davidson Pan America being sort of similar. I don't only know about KTM, but man, I really loved, and I still do love, this engine. Punchy everywhere, and the reason that I feel it's nicer and more fun than four-cylinder engines from Ducati and BMW, which both have more power, is that Triumph also nailed Tiger's gearing. Maybe only the first gear is slightly too long, as right after setting off it kind of lacks that punch that V2s and boxers have, but very quickly it gets to the point where those horses on steroids kick in and the bike explodes, as if it had two turbochargers. I feel that gearing is close to perfect, as the result is that the bike feels strong in any gear at any speed. The gears are also not as short as in Ducati Multistrada V4, so you've got an opportunity to feel that acceleration without changing gears all the freaking time, and it's really a joy. Add great stability at all times, and man, you roll the throttle wide open at any gear and it just goes where you point it like a train, and that's awesome. That's also not that obvious, as riding some other high-powered bikes in this class, it feels sometimes like it's too much for them, and so it's too much for you as well. Nothing like that here, and just full confidence. And nobody paid me to say that, and I didn't have a free trip to Portugal for the launch of the bike. It's really so good that it does deserve being praised. So you want to ride and accelerate again and again all day long. At higher gears and lower speeds, it doesn't get unhappy and it doesn't choke when you roll the throttle, but it steadily accelerates. Drop one or just two gears and it just flies forward. Really, there's so much flexibility thanks to this good gearing and lots of torque that this bike simply asks you to accelerate all the time. Now, once you reach the red line, it of course does limit the power, but it does it by letting some of it slip through, and it doesn't shut it down completely, so that you're suddenly left with no juice when accelerating. And that bothered me a lot in Ducati Multistrada V4. And you know, this sudden cut of fuel and a slowdown, and you're like, okay, what's going on? It needs a next gear. Here it's done in a more traditional way that just works better. That's fantastic, and this power plant is the best thing about this bike. The rest isn't that impressive. But this doesn't mean that it's not good. So let's check how it turns. It does turn, and after only a little bit of resistance, it starts leaning and pointing into the corners with a lot of precision. Actually, that's good. It could be more encouraging, I think, but I guess that the center of gravity doesn't maybe allow it to do so much. So it's not the best, but I would give it a second place along with Ducati Multistrada V4 after the big GS. Once you're in the corner, the Tiger doesn't resist anymore and somehow makes it even easier for you to tighten the corner. So that's when it starts to encourage you, and I like that part. On a road with not so many corners, it will be great, and one of the best in the class, I think. And I would say that the GS and Moto Guzzi V85 TT would have an edge, as they make changing directions easier and more fun. Tiger is very similar to Multistrada V4 here, with an exception that its engine makes you want to ride faster and faster, and also even in the corners. Then entering the city and heavier traffic It's pretty good. It goes perfectly straight when you want it and generally follows you, but you feel that it's quite a bit of weight located high from the ground, but it's definitely doing what you want it to. It's definitely good and refined within the class. I think that there is one thing that they could have made even better here, and I felt that the handlebar was a bit too straight for my taste, and I wish it was bent backwards a tiny bit more for me not to need to sort of reach out to it. It's not like it forced me to lean forward, as the position is perfectly upright for me at 183 centimeters tall or 6 feet tall, but having it just a little bit closer could make me control it better, I think. And also, I think that if it was a bit wider, then perhaps it could be perfect due to better control. On the other hand, this would make the whole bike wider, and in traffic this doesn't help that much, but I guess that a few centimeters would not make it suddenly a disaster. It's just handlebars are sticking out pretty significantly. That was a little bit of a warning for me. What's awesome is the seat that may just as well be one of the top 3 seats out there, along with Harley Pan America's and Moto Guzzi's V85 TT seat. It's nicely soft, it is wide enough with no hard edges, and so it ticks all the boxes for me. I had it in the lower position of 85 centimeters, and it may still be lifted to 87 centimeters, but I felt totally satisfied with it there. Just the gap that you see between the tank and the seat was a little bit annoying to me, but I could live with it, I guess. I had one more rider sit on the bike, and actually he also noticed how nice and comfy the seat was, so I guess there's something to that. So again, good job, Triumph. That's not the end, as the bike may have heated both seats. Yes, not only grips, but seats too. Both. It clearly tells us that Triumph is really pushing it here. Now, if I wanted the seat absolutely perfect, I would probably make it more flat, as the current setup was making me slide a little bit forward, just, you know, a tiny bit, but really a bit. So if not for that, I think it might be perfect in all areas. It's still absolutely fine, and I wouldn't actually probably touch it in the end at all. But it's really nothing to be concerned with, and just an observation, keep that in mind. It's also long enough, the seat gap, for you to move forward and backward if you wish. I usually sit more in front so that I can grab the bike well with my knees for as much control as possible. Foot pegs are located where you would want them, and knee angle was basically unnoticeable for me, and this means that I was fine with it, and that's why I wasn't paying attention to it. I bet that for a longer ride I could perhaps lift that seat and have it even more relaxed. In reality, it isn't cramped there at all. So another point here, and we know that some bikes in the class don't tick the box here, and I think I'll make a full category comparison once I get my hands on the big KTM. Well, if I get. So stay tuned. If you wonder about ground clearance, it seems to be 20 centimeters here, not the largest and not the smallest. R1250 GS has 18.5 and Multistrada V4 has 22. Also at the same time, just like GS Adventure, it's kind of in the middle. Now, there are my 2 complaints regarding comfort here. First is that at higher RPM, I felt a bit of vibration, especially when riding at certain speed without accelerating. I did notice that, and my natural reaction was to shift to a higher gear, and yeah, that would help. On the other hand, when accelerating, everything is battery smooth. When you start the engine, nothing happens. It just starts making noise. You don't feel anything. It's so smooth and effortless. Then stopping accelerating makes the bike somehow annoyed and it vibrates. That's funny, right? It tells you to push it, and if you comply, everything is fine. That wasn't a big issue, but it was there. The second complaint is the windshield, which surprisingly to me generates a lot of turbulences. It does shield you at speed, and thanks to it being height adjustable, you've really got a lot of choices that do actually make a difference. Raise it fully and you feel that it covers you, but unfortunately that's when you get turbulences, that's when you get the buffeting. So either a deflector is needed or a different windshield for this boy. So no need to panic anyway, as most adventure bikes need taller and better windscreens anyway for better protection. Here you will have also to eliminate turbulences on top of that, but the height adjustment system is probably the best in terms of the idea, aside from the electric one, which, well, used to be in a Tiger before. I guess the weight saving was just very extreme. Now it's a little bit flimsy. It actually doesn't require any tools. You can do it quickly when riding and with one hand, which is important. All you've got to do is just pull up this bar in the middle or push it down to adjust the height. Usually it doesn't require that much force, but when I was recording those shots that you see here, I suspect that it might have got stuck at some point, and I must have pulled it not perfectly evenly, not perfectly straight, and it didn't want to move. It was bending dangerously. I got it back to work by pressing it in the other direction, but that was one bit of a question for me. Is it strong and stiff enough to work and last? But the idea seems to be the easiest and the best at the same time. So that's nicely done, I would say, in the end. One more thing here is that I was getting dirt thrown into my helmet from underneath somehow. The stream of air seemed to throw stuff exactly at the bottom part of my helmet, and I would find a lot of stuff in my eyes, also crying at least once, even with a closed visor. And opening it just a little would throw plenty of crap. So how comfortable is the suspension and how does it deal with different surfaces? Well, this depends, as the bike has an adjustable suspension with many steps to choose from. It's not difficult and not easy to change the settings at the same time. Yeah, that's how it is. But you've got to go through a few steps in the menu to be able to change the suspension settings. The menu isn't exactly the easiest to navigate through in the beginning, but the way of controlling it, I think, is the best. And I'm very happy that at least Triumph knows how to do it properly. So there's a joystick, and it moves in 4 ways. And it also accepts stuff when you press it. And moving to the left makes it go back. Moving to the right makes it go further into the chosen setting. And through the rest, you just navigate going up and down. If you want to go to the main screen, you've got a separate button for that. You just click at your back where you started. You see your gauges. However, it's on the right side of the handlebar. I'm not sure why, but that's where it is. Sometimes it's not clear where you are and how to get back. But after some practice, it became fine for me. For riding modes, you've got a separate button that's on the left handlebar next to the joystick, which makes some maybe sense, but I'm not sure it makes all that sense. What doesn't make sense exactly is that instead of changing modes with that one button, you only select the mode with this button, but then you've got to accept it with the joystick. And then the bike may tell you as well to close the throttle to accept it once again. So there are 3 steps, and I feel it's a little bit too many, and I would prefer to just change the modes immediately when selecting them and not have to confirm it twice. Just a hint from me. Still, I think that the most of us will just stick to sport or road mode and only play with suspension afterwards, because that can be done separately. So the most sporty suspension is shaky. Then in soft mode you feel that the rear suspension becomes softer and more floaty, while the front is just, well, it's basically normal. It also dives when you brake with the front brake. I feel that it does it actually a bit too much, but then you move all the way to sporty setting again and it's no longer floaty in the rear and everything becomes actually, yeah, so shaky that experimenting with that on this uneven road that you see right now, I couldn't switch all those points back to fully soft again, as I couldn't keep my thumb on the joystick. I'm not kidding. And I really don't know where to use this sporty suspension setup except for a racetrack. Then the fully comfortable is really floaty, the soft, and even though I like it as soft as it can be, this was too much. It was too much like sailing, with the damper not making it all balanced quick enough. And I just had to move it still a little bit closer to normal and make my peace with it. And I would say that on a longer trip, you may make it fully soft and enjoy, but otherwise most of us, I think, may prefer it closer to normal with a little bit on the softer side. So yeah, it can swallow bumps similarly to BMW R1250 GS and Multistrada V4, but the extreme positions are just perhaps too extreme to use. Maybe not as much of a road glide, it is still as Harley Pan America, but it's definitely fine on the side of comfort. It's definitely good enough. Actually, it was diving too much, I mentioned that. Well, it was actually freaking diabolical. This requires a very firm comment from my side because it was outside of what's normal for me. But the thing is that it's not really suspension's fault that much. It dives like in most other adventure bikes, or even a bit less perhaps. The thing that totally surprises the front suspension and you, yourself, and myself, is the front brake. This system is as sensitive as a 16-year-old girl. You press it just a little bit and there is no resistance. It ignores you, and that's fairly normal. But then comes that resistance that you expect. You just don't expect the force and the sudden burst into tears and all the brutality along with it. It's like it wanted to lock the brake. And this is not a front brake that is rider friendly, let's call it this way. And after the whole day, it would cause an exact same reaction, even though I knew what I was dealing with. And check this out, just pressing it a little bit and letting it go, it would compress the front suspension like crazy. The brake was very strong generally, and also when braking from higher speeds like this here, even though it would also stay nicely pumped afterwards, but it worked very well. The rear brake is fine as well, and no surprises here. It's got a little bit sensitive ABS. The front one is so effective that you may forget about using the rear one anyways. It's kind of like this was not the best point, and it influenced my perception of the front suspension, seeming therefore too soft because of this behavior. Overall, I don't think it was too soft if it was operating normally just with a normal brake. But what about the riding modes and how they influence the engine and throttle response? And I'll tell you two things here, with the first being that I would be fully happy with the sport mode, maybe if not for one thing. In sport mode, the bike is sharp and it kind of whispers to you to push it and enjoy it. It's really fantastic. It is flexible, it's eager to accelerate and screams like an eagle in higher revs, but in a nice way. But in tighter situations like riding in the city, the engine braking when closing the throttle fully in the first and second gear is a little bit violent. If you want all that torque, I guess, you've got to deal with it. So yeah, it may after some time get too shaky at lower speeds when you do a lot of engaging and disengaging the throttle. So then I switched at some point to the road mode, and it was indeed visibly smoother. And props to Triumph for making the differences in modes so distinctive here. However, in the road mode, and there are like 5 modes in total, including off-road and also your own mode. Now, in the road mode, I noticed that I've got to add way more throttle to set off without stalling the bike, to do it comfortably. It felt a little bit like those steroids were wearing off and the bike grew somehow tired. It wouldn't react as eagerly to opening the throttle, and I had a feeling that it's not as cocky anymore. I did like its smoother reaction to opening and closing the throttle in the first gear, but everything else I didn't like that much in comparison with the sport mode. If I could combine these two, it would be perfect, but if you don't feel like you want to push the bike all the time, or you're already close to losing your rider's license, you may be fine with this road mode, I think. But if you want to enjoy every ride, staying in the sport mode and just being more careful in the first gear would be the best solution. But this is definitely where the Tiger is a tiger. Traction control also seems to work differently in those modes, but in the sport mode it would work almost perfectly with only a few times limiting the bike for a little bit too long accelerating straight. In turns it would allow for just a little bit of slip, but nothing so dangerous on a dry road at least. Not sure I would actually try riding like that in the wet, not in a sport mode definitely. Now another great topic, the transmission. It is a great topic because there are great things to say about this gearbox. It worked 100% as I wanted it to, with no fighting, with no missed gears, a clear move of lever, very smooth, and being not too hard to move at the same time, clearly telling you that you have engaged the next gear. Really, if all gearboxes work like this one, it would be a perfect world. But actually, after giving it a compliment, I've got to take part of that back. Because finding neutral, it usually takes a few tries, and for some reason it's easier from the second gear rather than the first. And also, the quick shifter is sluggish, I think. After all that, the quick shifter changes gears in a way that makes me think that I would do it quicker. It's a slow shifter. That wasn't the best part. Still, downshifting with a quick shifter, that was amazingly smooth. And you may disable traction control and also hill hold, which is actually not that useful, just like in other motorcycles, so if you don't press the rear brake. I stopped uphill once with my right leg on the ground, and I could actually benefit from the system there, but there was no way for me to change legs just to press the rear brake to engage heel hold. So I had to struggle a little bit. I guess that's what it was designed to help with. It is not as intelligent to notice the heel on its own and engage the brake on its own, but if you use that rear brake, it may help you at some point. And one more thing that you may adjust is indicators. I got the bike with the indicators blinking only 3 times after turning them on. At first I didn't know about that. I would be just surprised that the bike would switch them off so quickly, even before I would reach a turn. But then after holding the switch longer, I realized it actually makes them blink permanently. I get the idea, it's like in cars, and I wish that the switch was also a little bit more to the front, and I mean that it was not that far to the back at the same time, with a whole set of those switches on the left handlebar, as I had to reach out far back with my thumb to reach it. Thankfully, switching indicators off, there's a clear click telling you that you just switched it off. And this is not that common today in this class of motorcycles, and Triumph went for what we all know works. And I'm very grateful for that. What I haven't figured out till now is how the high beam lights work. There's an LED front light with either a nice flat stripe of LED as a daytime running light, or those strong normal LEDs on the sides. But if you want to flash the light, you pull this lever. But no, because if you do that, the bike switches the high beam on fully. And then to switch it off, you've got to pull the lever again. So in the end, I haven't found a proper way of operating the flash. If you guys know, please do let me know. The light is big and strong, and my unit also had side additional lights installed with a separate switch. That was nice. GT Pro comes with them as standard. There's one more thing that we all love, and that's backlit switches. So you see what you can press also at night. Hooray, guys! That's a win over BMW, and well done to Triumph again. But what may really make an even larger difference is how this new Triumph Tiger 1200 is propelled, because the manufacturer decided to not save costs and then use some bullcrap excuses later on, and they have given the big Tiger a proper drive shaft. And this one is just as good as the one in BMW. Some parts of it are on both sides of the bike, so on its own it doesn't look as cool maybe as in a GS with that single-sided swing arm with the drive shaft incorporated in it, but at least it's stable. BMW is also stable, and you don't feel its reaction at all. Before this Triumph, I was riding a Moto Guzzi V85 TT, and the drive shaft in that bike was affecting the bike every time you would open and close the throttle, as it would lift the bike with you on top of it and then drop when you release the throttle. Here it is absolutely perfect in terms of operation, and thank you Triumph again for doing a fantastic job. Now I'd like the others to follow for the benefit of all us. This makes it, I think, a proper competitor for the GS in my eyes, especially when it comes to touring. There's no need to do anything about it. There's no spraying, there's no can, no checking of the tension, no mess, no additional lubricating system, no unnecessary crap and effort. Very nice. And it still looks interesting from both sides. That's free of charge. This, a fully clear system, and a possibility of having blind spot monitoring system with a radar in the back, I think those things make it even greater. Add a comfortable ride and brilliant engine, and there is a screw up or two in this summary, because for some weird reason you may only get the rear radar in the Triumph Explorer version of this Tiger 1200, which comes with a 30-liter tank and a higher price tag. And I'm thinking, what in the world is the connection between the size of a fuel tank and the possibility of installing a radar and lights in the mirrors that go with it? I really don't see a connection, and I think this is a bit weird. I really don't want to upgrade to a more bulky bike that also weighs more. I don't need 30 liters, but I would like to have that radar, as it can actually save my butt everywhere. So why make it only available to the Fat Tiger? Another screw up is the exhaust, which successfully makes the deep tones completely disappear in its inside at idle and when revving the bike. It sounds like a lawnmower with only some mechanical noise, and there's also some rattling noise until you pull the clutch. I guess we will see what this leads to, but in some other bikes, it leads to growing vibration over time and eventually broken clutch baskets. So overall, the bike isn't sounding sexy till you start riding and hit higher RPM, at which then it changes and the bike sounds actually very nice. However, I understand that at lower RPM or just revving the bike, that it's the legislation problem that kills basically all stock motorcycles, and here it is too, so don't expect too much. Take things into your own hands, I suggest, and give it a proper aftermarket exhaust. Not a loud one, as the sound isn't that awesome and that pleasant, but one that would bring the deep tones back. And I assure you that this will complement the bike very nicely. I can even promise it to you, it's going to be worth it. But hey, there's more. If you look at available variants, there are some things that you need to know from the beginning. They may be kind of confusing at first. There are 3 facts you need to know as they influence the final choice of a version a lot. First of all, there is either a GT or rally line. GT is meant for basically only on-road riding, and rally gives you a 21-inch front rim, and both rims are cross-spoked. GT has more street-oriented tires, Rally has ones that are more in the middle. There's also 2 centimeters more wheels travel in the front and rear, and that's interesting, as Triumph also claims that the whole Rally lineup is taller at the same time as well. This also includes the seat that's 2.5 centimeters higher by default, so at 87.5 centimeters instead of 85 in the lower position in the GT, and that's all the way to 89.5 in the Rally, which is pretty tall. Also, the handlebars are 1.6 centimeters higher in the Rally versions. That's the first thing. The second is that there is this Explorer version, which also adds a 30-liter tank instead of a 20-liter tank, and it's both for GT and for Rally versions. Now, the last third fact is that the basic GT variant has almost nothing in its equipment and is there just to claim a lower initial price of the bike by Triumph. But nobody will spend so much money for a bike that doesn't have cruise control, it doesn't have a quick or slow shifter, it doesn't have an aluminum engine cover, no cornering light, even though it's still an LED light. There's no hill hold in the basic one. There's also 3 riding modes instead of possible 5. This is just a software thing, I think, just to discourage you fully, if you're still not convinced, from even thinking about ordering a pure GT version. So you've got to go for the GT Pro, which is more expensive, but looking at the base price, relatively not so much more expensive. Now you know, and I hope that this brief explanation will be useful to you guys. And also note that all Tigers 1200 come with an 18-inch rear rim and not a standard in the category 17-inch rim. And I know that there is some confusion and wrong information quoted, same as there is no front radar available in Triumph Tiger 1200, at least in 2022. So at the same time, there's only normal cruise control and not adaptive. There can only be this funny looking rear radar that scans the road behind you on the sides and warns you when there is another vehicle approaching you from the side, and it lights up those lamps in the corresponding mirror telling you it's there, something coming from the back. This is really nice and I would gladly have it, but I still don't want the bigger Explorer, so I cannot have it here. Why tire pressure monitoring system isn't standard? All I know is that only the Explorers have it, and in other variants you've got to pay extra for it. The weights of the variants also are different, but they're not particularly heavy, and the most common version, and so the one that I have, the GT Pro, is 245 kilograms with 90% of fuel in the tank. So I would say it's reasonable and it doesn't seem heavy at all to me. Still, I would recommend adding upper and lower crash bars if a certain version doesn't actually have them or only has the lower ones. Protecting it may pay off. I also love this small rear fender. Now, it is rather hot during my days with the Tiger. It's actually 32 degrees now. I just came back from a ride. it's hot. The bike is doing a really good job staying reasonably cool, even though I was pushing it hard and enjoying it. And also we spent some time in the capital city with some stops. It was a little bit colder, it was around 27, 28, but there were some stops and so on. And I've heard the fans maybe only once, and that was it. So heat management is good here as well. It is a sophisticated motorcycle, definitely. Absolutely, I'm absolutely certain about that, and you feel the quality. I'm going to say that this is the first manufacturer that in my eyes matches BMW's quality totally one-to-one, looking at the components, looking at the fairings, looking at the paint, at metal elements, those little details and switches, which are also super important in how things work. The quality is, I think, fantastic. The display is nice and crisp, with pretty graphics that are clean. And I really like the displayed analog rev counter, as to me that's the best solution today, since we've got to make our peace with those fully digital screens and no real physical needles. Two design modes that are there are very similar, so nothing innovative here. What's not encouraging is the choppy animations, both when moving between the screens and also in the rev counter operation, and that's a shame. But the display is clean and easy to read, so points for that, and also for a properly working outside temperature guide. Mirrors seemed weird in the beginning, but then I liked them as they are big enough and they have a fairly helpful, I would call it, shape. So a fantastic engine, high level of comfort, drive shaft, lots of fun, adequate handling at all speeds against air turbulences, vibration, no blind spot monitoring for anything other than the fatty version, and panicking front brake. I definitely enjoyed riding it, mostly because of the engine that makes the bike so awesome. I'll also make videos comparing it directly to the GS Multistrada and others, and they may already be up when you're watching it. If so, then there are links to them in the description. If not, then I'm still working on them. This is definitely a motorcycle worth considering, and to me, this is what a bike from top 3 in the category looks like. If it's number 1, 2, or 3, depends on what you personally enjoy the most in motorcycles. If it had a sound of a V2 engine, it would be my all-time favorite. But if a GS had the engine of this Triumph Tiger 1200, I would choose it over the Tiger. But it doesn't, and that's what makes it so interesting. I think that would be satisfied having a Triumph Tiger 1200 in this GT Pro version and riding it every day and all day. I would replace the windshield and a muffler and I would be happy with it. I'm not a fan of the design, but maybe playing with colors could help. So I'm giving it an 8 out of 10, and that's a very good score. That's it from me, guys, and see you in the next video, and I'm going for the ride again. Bye!